A little girl ran up to me in a grocery store parking lot, her eyes wide, her voice trembling. "Please pretend you're my dad. He's coming." She pointed at a man walking toward us, calm and smiling like he'd done nothing wrong. I had seconds to decide. So I took her hand, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "Hey, kiddo, ready to go home?" I didn't know her name. I didn't know what I was stepping into. But I knew one thing. No child should ever have to ask a stranger to save them. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. But first, if you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% viewers who click on the like button. It makes us really happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories. It will be great to tell us where you are watching us from in the comment section. It was one of those dull, gray afternoons where the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or just hang low and sulk. I had just finished picking up a few things from the grocery store: eggs, bread, canned chili, the kind of bachelor essentials that wouldn't go bad if I forgot I had them. I wasn't in a rush, just taking my time like I always did on Sundays. I remember thinking how quiet the parking lot felt, how the rows of cars and shopping carts looked frozen under the overcast light, like a still frame waiting for something to crack it open. I had just unlocked my truck when I heard the footsteps, small, frantic, not the kind that usually belong in a parking lot full of strangers. Then I saw her. She was running straight toward me, hair wild, backpack slipping off one shoulder, eyes wide in a way that made my chest tighten before she even said a word. She couldn't have been older than 8. "Please pretend you're my dad," she whispered, voice shaky but controlled, like she'd rehearsed this exact moment in her head 100 times. "He's coming." At first, I didn't move. My brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe she'd mistaken me for someone else. But then I looked into her eyes, big, dark, terrified, and something in me just responded. Before I could even ask her what was going on, I looked up and saw him. A man, mid-30s maybe, walking straight toward us from across the lot. He wasn't running. He wasn't shouting. He was smiling. Calm. Too calm. Like he was in control of the situation. But the tighter the girl gripped my hand, the more I understood that nothing about this was safe. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, kiddo," I said, loud enough for him to hear. "Ready to go home?" The man slowed. His eyes flicked to me. His smile didn't drop, but it stiffened just enough to set off every alarm bell in my gut. He stopped about 20 feet away, hands in his pockets. "Ava," he said, voice too smooth, too rehearsed. "Come on now, sweetheart." She buried herself into my side, arms wrapped around my waist, like she was trying to disappear into me. My heart was pounding, but my body was still. I squared my shoulders, glanced around, no one nearby. Just a mom buckling her kid into a minivan 2 rows over. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I wasn't about to let her go to him. "We're good here," I said firmly. "You need something?" He raised his eyebrows, still smiling, but there was something twitching in his jaw now. "She's mine," he said, motioning toward her. "My daughter. She gets confused sometimes." "I'm not confused," Ava said, voice muffled but clear. "He's not my dad. I don't know him." That changed everything. The man's expression didn't shift, but he took one step forward. "Look, buddy, I think you're misunderstanding." I raised my hand. "You take one more step, and I'm calling the police." We locked eyes for a second. Just 1 second. But it felt like a lifetime. There was a flicker, just a flash, of something mean in his face. Something tired of pretending. Then he smiled again, even wider this time, like we were all just part of some inside joke I hadn't been letting on. And he turned and walked away. Just like that. He didn't argue, didn't protest, just walked off, disappearing behind the row of parked cars like he'd never been there at all. For a moment, I couldn't move. Neither could she. I looked down at her, her face still pressed against me, her tiny hands clenched in my jacket. She was shaking. "You okay?" I asked softly. She didn't answer. "Do you want me to take you to the police?" I tried again. She looked up at me, eyes glassy but dry. "Please don't make me go back to him." That's when I realized I wasn't part of a misunderstanding. I was in the middle of something real, something big, something I couldn't walk away from now, even if I wanted to. We sat in my truck for a while. I kept the engine running, heat on low. I handed her a bottle of water from the center console, and she sipped it with both hands like it might slip through her fingers. She wouldn't say much, just that her name was Ava, and she didn't want to go home. I didn't press. Not yet. I just kept my tone calm and told her she was safe. And the weirdest part? She believed me. Like she'd decided the second she saw me that I was someone who would listen. Like I looked the part. I drove us to the nearest police station, heart pounding the whole way. Every red light felt like a lifetime. Every car that passed made me wonder if he was following. Ava stayed quiet, curled into the passenger seat, still gripping her backpack like it was the only thing she had left in the world. I remember thinking how small she looked, how angry I felt that someone out there, someone with that smile, had made her this afraid. When we got there, I walked her inside and explained everything. The officer at the front desk raised an eyebrow, then quickly took Ava aside to speak with a social worker. I sat on a bench in the waiting room, adrenaline crashing down on me like a migraine. They questioned me, asked if I'd ever seen her before. I told them the truth. I hadn't. Not once. I was just there, at the right place at the right time. Or maybe the wrong one. I wasn't sure yet. 2 hours later, they told me she'd be placed in emergency foster care for the night. That she hadn't given much detail. Just that a man had been following her for days. That she didn't feel safe. That she didn't want to go back. She gave us your name. The social worker said, eyes cautious but kind. Said you were the only one who helped her. I blinked. What does that mean? She doesn't want to stay at the shelter. She asked if you'd take her. Just for now. Just until we sort things out. I looked through the glass at Ava, sitting on a chair, knees pulled to her chest, watching me with eyes that didn't match her age. I wasn't a parent. I didn't have any training. I barely kept plants alive. But the way she looked at me, like I was already her lifeline, made something settle deep in my chest. I nodded. And just like that, a girl I didn't know 12 hours ago was coming home with me. The drive home that night was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm. The kind where everything looks the same on the outside, but you know something irreversible just happened. Ava sat beside me in the passenger seat, still clutching her backpack like it was a shield. I had turned the heat on low again and kept my hands steady on the wheel, trying to act like this was just another drive. Like this was normal. Like I wasn't bringing a child I'd known for less than a day into my house because she asked me to. And because I couldn't stand the thought of her being anywhere else. Every now and then, I glanced over at her. Just quick glances, nothing that would make her feel watched. She kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, expression unreadable, but her posture gave her away. Her shoulders were stiff, like she was bracing for something to go wrong again. Like safety was a temporary illusion, and she'd learned not to trust it. I didn't say much, because honestly, I didn't know what the hell to say. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't something I should be part of, that there were trained professionals for this, people who understood kids like her, people who had degrees and protocols and answers. I was just a guy who changed oil and rotated tires for a living. My house didn't even have a spare bed. I lived alone, had lived alone for years, and I'd gotten used to the space and the quiet and the way no one asked anything of me at the end of the day. And yet, here I was, pulling into my driveway with a scared little girl who trusted me more than she trusted the people paid to protect her. That kind of responsibility didn't sit lightly on the chest. It pressed down slow and deep, like a weight you weren't sure you could lift until you tried. When we got inside, I motioned for her to take off her shoes and hang up her coat. She hesitated for a second, like she was waiting for me to snap at her, but then slowly obeyed. She moved carefully, like she was trying not to take up too much space, her eyes flicking around the room like she was memorizing it in case she had to run. I offered her the couch and went to grab an extra blanket and pillow from the hall closet. I didn't have a kid's room. No toys. No nightlight. Just an old guest blanket that still smelled faintly like dust and cedar. When I came back, she was sitting on the very edge of the couch, hands folded tightly in her lap, backpack still next to her like it might get stolen if she looked away for too long. "This okay?" I asked, kneeling slightly so I wouldn't tower over her. She nodded, eyes down. "You want something to eat? I've got some frozen pizza. Or cereal. If you're more into that. Again, just a nod. I went with cereal. It felt safe. I poured 2 bowls of Cheerios and handed her one. She took it with both hands, holding it like it might disappear. Then, she said her first full sentence of the night. Do you lock your doors? I paused, spoon halfway to my mouth. Yeah, always. Her eyes finally met mine. Double lock. I can. She gave a small nod, and I got up and did it. She didn't touch her cereal until she heard the click. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just fear. This was a child who had lived in fear long enough to build routines around it. Kids don't usually ask about locks. They don't sit like statues or speak like lawyers trying to say only what's necessary. Ava wasn't acting scared. She was acting trained. Like someone had taught her exactly what to do and what not to do to stay safe. After she ate, I set up a small bed on the couch. I told her she could use the bathroom, showed her where the towels were, and told her I'd be in the room down the hall if she needed anything. She nodded again, still silent. I didn't push her to talk. That didn't feel right. I just made sure the hall light stayed on, turned off the TV, and gave her space. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart heavy in a way it hadn't been in years. I wasn't scared, exactly, but I wasn't settled either. There was something too big about all of it. The way she clung to me in that parking lot. The look on that man's face when he said she was confused. The fact that she wasn't. And now this strange, unwanted bond that had formed between us. Not because of trust, but because of desperation. I kept wondering why me. Why she picked me out of all the strangers in that parking lot. Did I look safe? Did I look harmless? Or was it something deeper? Something she couldn't explain, but just felt? Around 3 a.m., I heard her scream. It was sharp, raw, and short, cut off like she'd forced herself to stop. I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room. She was sitting upright on the couch, breath ragged, clutching her backpack with both arms. I knelt beside her, hands up. It's okay. It's okay. You're safe. She didn't say anything. Just looked at me, eyes glassy, mouth trembling. Nightmare? I asked. She nodded once. You want to talk about it? Another head shake. Okay, that's all right. I got her a glass of water and sat on the floor beside the couch for a while, just so she could see me, feel that someone was close. She didn't ask me to leave, and I didn't try to leave too soon. Eventually, she lay back down. I stayed until her breathing evened out. Then I went back to my room and didn't sleep a wink. Because I knew now, this wasn't going to be a one-night thing. And the more I saw of her, the more I started to believe that the man she ran from, he wasn't some fluke. He was real, and he might come back. The first few days with Ava felt like walking through a house full of pressure plates. Nothing exploded, but every step felt like it could. She followed rules I never said out loud, washed her bowl immediately, lined her shoes perfectly by the door, folded the blanket after sleeping on the couch. No reminders, no complaints. It was the kind of obedience that didn't come from discipline, but from survival. I found myself watching her more than I meant to, not out of suspicion, but concern. Kids her age weren't supposed to move through the world like that. Quiet, careful, constantly measuring. I tried to act normal, kept my routine steady, went to work during the day while a temporary caseworker checked in. But even when I wasn't home, my thoughts stayed locked on that living room couch and the small girl trying to take up as little space in my life as possible. She didn't talk much at first, but when she did, it was in short bursts, facts, not feelings. She told me she liked pancakes, but only if they weren't soggy. That she hated loud movies. That she didn't like closed doors unless she could see who was on the other side. She never asked for anything, not once. If she wanted water, she waited until I offered. If she needed help with homework the caseworker dropped off, she sat at the table until I noticed. It unsettled me more than tantrums ever could have. It felt like she'd learned somewhere along the way that asking questions led to consequences. And every time I thought about that smiling man in the parking lot, my stomach twisted just a little tighter. The call started on the 4th day. The first one came while I was at work. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, it was a man's voice, calm, polite, almost friendly. He said he was a relative of Ava's, her uncle, and that he'd been desperately trying to locate her. He said there must have been some confusion and that he wanted to clear things up. He left a callback number. No threats. No anger. Just a tone that suggested reasonable people solve misunderstandings. I forwarded the message to the caseworker immediately, but the unease didn't leave me. That voice didn't sound frantic. It sounded practiced. The second call came the next night, and this time, Ava heard it. The phone rang while we were eating dinner. She froze mid-bite, eyes snapping to the counter like she'd just heard a gunshot. I let it ring out, but the damage was done. Her shoulders climbed toward her ears, and she didn't relax until I turned the phone face down. "Do you know that number?" I asked gently. She shook her head too fast. "It's okay if you don't," I added. "You're not in trouble." Her voice came out small. "He lies." That was it. That was all she said. But it was enough. That night, she had another nightmare. This one worse than the last. She didn't scream. She whimpered, over and over, like she was bargaining with something invisible. I sat with her again, back against the couch, while she clutched her backpack even in her sleep. I wondered what kind of man taught a child that the safest thing she owned was something she could run with. I wondered how many adults had already failed her before she ran up to me in that parking lot and made me part of her story. The next day, I noticed the bruises. They were faint, yellowed at the edges, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. One on her upper arm, another just below her knee. I didn't say anything at first. I waited. I watched how she moved, how she flinched when I reached too suddenly, how she avoided changing clothes unless the bathroom door was locked and I was nowhere nearby. This wasn't clumsiness. This wasn't childhood roughhousing. It was a pattern, one I hated recognizing, because recognizing it meant admitting how bad things might really be. I brought it up carefully with the caseworker, who nodded but didn't promise anything. She said investigations took time, that allegations had to be verified, that there were protocols. I wanted to scream. Ava didn't feel like a protocol. She felt like a countdown. That night, I finally asked her the question I'd been avoiding. Who was the man in the parking lot? She went very still. "I don't have to talk," she said immediately, voice flat. "You don't," I agreed. "But you can, if you want." Silence stretched between us. Thick, heavy. "He smiles," she said finally. "Even when he's mad." My jaw clenched. "Does he live with you?" She shook her head. "He visits." That word made my skin crawl. "Does he hurt you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked at the seam of her sleeve, eyes fixed on her fingers. "He says I make him do it," she whispered. I felt something snap inside me. Something cold and protective and furious. I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't need details. I didn't want them. What mattered was that she trusted me enough to say that. And that meant the situation was worse than anyone official wanted to admit. That night, after she went to sleep, I checked every lock again. Then I sat at the kitchen table and made a decision I hadn't wanted to make. I wasn't just helping a lost kid anymore. I was protecting her, and I had no idea how much that was going to cost me. By the second week, I stopped pretending this was temporary. I didn't say it out loud, not to Ava, not to the caseworker, not even to myself, but my body knew before my brain caught up. I woke earlier. I checked the locks twice. I started parking my truck closer to the house instead of at the curb. I memorized the sound of Ava's footsteps, the way she padded softly down the hallway in the mornings like she was afraid to wake the walls. She had started school again by then, a temporary placement at a nearby elementary, and every afternoon when I picked her up, she scanned the parking lot before getting in the truck. Always scanning, always calculating. A child shouldn't have to live like that. And yet, she had, long before I ever entered her life. It was laundry day when everything shifted. I was folding clothes in the living room, trying to keep my hands busy while Ava worked on homework at the table. I reached into the washing machine to grab the last load, her jacket among them, heavier than I remembered. When I picked it up, something inside the lining shifted unnaturally. I frowned, fingers pressing into the fabric, and felt paper. Carefully, deliberately, I reached into the seam and pulled out a folded photograph. It was worn soft at the edges, creased like it had been opened and closed too many times to count. I didn't look at it right away. I don't know why. Maybe some instinct telling me once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. But eventually, I unfolded it. It was Ava, younger, maybe 6 or 7. And behind her, one arm resting on her shoulder like a claim, was the smiling man. The photo wasn't posed. It wasn't a family portrait. Ava's eyes were wide, unfocused, her mouth pressed tight in a way I recognized now. The man was smiling at the camera, head tilted slightly, like he wanted to appear gentle. But his grip told a different story. It wasn't affectionate. It was controlling, possessive, the kind of touch that said you belong to me, not I care about you. My stomach turned. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't confusion. This was proof. I sat there longer than I should have, staring at that photo while the washing machine beeped behind me. My chest felt tight, like the room had shrunk. I didn't want to scare Ava, so I slipped the photo into my pocket and went back into the living room like nothing had changed. She looked up at me once, eyes flicking to my face, and I wondered if she could tell. Kids like her usually could. They picked up on shifts in tone, posture, breathing. Survival had trained them well. That night, after Ava fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and went through her backpack. I hated myself for it, but I also knew better than to pretend privacy mattered more than safety right now. Inside, beneath notebooks and pencils, I found drawings. Dozens of them. Most were normal. Houses, trees, stick figures, but some weren't. Some showed a man with a smiling face and dark scribbles around his hands. Some showed a small figure hiding under a bed. One showed a parking lot, two figures standing together, and another walking away. That one had today's date written in the corner. Ava hadn't panicked in that parking lot by accident. She'd planned it. She'd waited. She'd chosen. That realization broke something in me. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was a child who had decided the only way out was to run toward a stranger and hope he wasn't dangerous too. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I made calls. Not to the police. They already knew what they were willing to know. I called an old acquaintance instead, a man named Ron who used to bring his truck into the shop years ago, before he switched careers. Investigative journalism. The kind of guy who didn't let things go when stories didn't add up. I told him everything I could without violating Ava's privacy. I sent him the photo, the drawings, the voicemails. He didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, he exhaled slowly and said, "This isn't new." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I've seen versions of this before," he said. "Cases that disappear, reports sealed, foster placements that get reassigned quietly when things get uncomfortable." My blood went cold. Over the next few days, Ron dug. He didn't promise miracles, just truth. And the truth came back uglier than I expected. The man from the parking lot had been investigated once, years ago. Allegations that went nowhere. No charges. No conviction. Just a paper trail that stopped abruptly. Ava had been placed in a home connected to him through a relative. A loophole. A favor. The system's favorite kind of mistake. She'd been failed quietly, efficiently, and repeatedly. When Ron told me, my hands shook. I looked at Ava, sitting on the floor building a puzzle, humming softly under her breath. And I knew something else then too. This wasn't just about protecting her anymore. This was about refusing to hand her back to a system that already taught her how disposable she was. The man showed up 3 days later. I saw him through the window first, standing on the sidewalk. Same smile, same calm posture, like he belonged there, like he had every right. Ava froze the moment she saw him. I stepped in front of her without thinking. When I opened the door, he didn't flinch. "I think we need to talk," he said, holding out a folder. "There's been a mistake." I didn't take it. "You need to leave," I said. He smiled wider. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." "Oh, I do," I replied, voice steady despite the rage burning through me. "And I'm not stepping aside." That smile faltered, just slightly. And for the first time since the parking lot, I saw it clearly. The man wasn't afraid of the truth. He was afraid of someone finally believing her. And I wasn't backing down. When the story went public, it didn't explode all at once. It leaked, like a crack in a dam that starts with a trickle before the flood. Ron published the piece 2 days after that man showed up on my doorstep. It was carefully written, thoroughly sourced, and backed with more documentation than I knew existed. Names were redacted, details were guarded, but the core was undeniable. A young girl failed by the system, placed in a home tied to prior abuse claims, and then left unprotected until she ran into the arms of a stranger in a grocery store parking lot. That part, the stranger, was me. My name wasn't included in the article, but it didn't take long for local folks to connect the dots. Mechanics don't exactly blend into the background in small towns, especially not ones who suddenly take in a little girl no one's ever seen before. The first reaction came from neighbors. Subtle at first. Less eye contact. Fewer waves. One woman, someone I'd known for years, actually crossed the street to avoid walking past my house. Then came the church ladies, the ones who used to bake too many pies and drop them off, just because. They stopped coming. Then, a customer I'd worked with for over a decade came in for an oil change and, without meeting my eyes, said, "Didn't figure you for the type to get mixed up in something like this." I didn't bother asking what this meant. I already knew. People don't want complications in their community. They want problems solved quietly and stories that end with neat little bows. I was neither. The police showed up again, too. Not to arrest me, though I could tell that option hadn't been fully taken off the table, but to remind me that the case was ongoing and that interfering with legal guardianship was serious business. I told them what I'd told them before. Ava came to me. She named her abuser. She refused to go back. And I refused to be another adult who failed her because it was easier to trust a smiling man in a button-down shirt than a little girl too scared to sleep without the hallway light on. They didn't argue, exactly, but they left with more questions than answers. One of them glanced at Ava on the way out. She was coloring at the table, headphones on, completely still. That officer looked at her like she was a ghost he didn't know how to carry. The worst of it came online. Once the article was shared around, speculation took over. Comment threads filled with people calling me everything from a hero to a kidnapper. Someone posted an old photo of me from a company picnic and claimed I'd been acting weird around children for years. Others swore I was part of some underground network, or that Ava was just a troubled foster kid making things up for attention. The theories multiplied faster than any of us could keep up. Ron tried to shut them down, but the internet doesn't care about facts. It cares about feelings. And nothing makes people feel louder than the idea that a child might be in danger, especially when they get to play detective from the comfort of their phones. I stopped reading the comments, but Ava saw some of them. I found her curled up on the couch one night, holding my phone with trembling fingers. Her face was blank, but her eyes weren't. They were glassy, hollow. "They think I'm lying," she whispered. I sat beside her, careful not to crowd. "They don't know you, and they don't matter." She looked up at me, and there was something devastating in her voice when she said, "But what if they believe him instead?" That right there, that was the wound deeper than any bruise. Not the pain of being hurt, the pain of not being believed, of knowing that even when you tell the truth, the world might shrug and turn away. I couldn't promise her that everyone would believe her. I couldn't promise that the system would work this time. But I could promise one thing, and I did. I believe you, and I'm not leaving. It was the first time I saw her cry. Not scream, not hide, not shake. Cry. Real tears, no apologies. I let her. I didn't ask her to stop. We sat there for almost an hour, her head leaning against my shoulder, her body finally, allowing itself to feel safe enough to fall apart. That was the night she called me by name. Not Mr. Not Sir. Just quietly, like it had always been true. Eric. It wasn't a big gesture, but it meant everything. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week. It came faster than expected, which meant everyone was scrambling. The caseworker filed an emergency petition to prevent Ava from being returned to her previous placement. Ron got a legal team involved, pro bono, and I, who had no legal experience, no parental credentials, no idea what the hell I was doing, found myself sitting across from attorneys who asked me if I'd be willing to become her guardian, at least temporarily. "Do you understand what that means?" they asked. I nodded, but I didn't speak. Because how do you explain that your life doesn't feel like yours anymore unless she's in it? That every morning feels wrong unless you're making pancakes for someone who only just started trusting you enough to ask for syrup? That the idea of letting her go back feels worse than anything you've ever imagined? Yes, I understood. And I said yes, even though I was terrified, even though I knew the cost could be everything. Because love doesn't always start with blood. Sometimes it starts with someone whispering, "Please pretend you're my dad." And sometimes, pretending becomes real. The hearing didn't feel like justice. It felt like survival being cross-examined. I sat in a room where strangers in suits debated a little girl's future like she was a line item on a spreadsheet. They used words like placement history, psychological evaluation, and trauma-informed transition, but none of them could say what I already knew, that Ava didn't need another case file. She needed a home, a place that didn't disappear when she opened her mouth, a door that didn't shut when she spoke the truth. She sat beside me, small but steady, wearing the only dress she owned, her hair pulled back neatly, the same way she wore it on the day she ran toward me in that parking lot. And just like then, she didn't cry, didn't flinch. She just gripped my hand under the table and stared straight ahead, as if daring someone to tell her she didn't know what safety looked like. The man didn't show up in person. His lawyer came instead, armed with statements and court documents that tried to explain everything away. Misunderstandings, behavioral issues, emotional instability. There was talk of medication, of uncooperative behavior, of her resistance to reunification efforts. I wanted to scream, to stand up and say, she wasn't uncooperative. She was protecting herself because no one else did. But I didn't. I sat there and let the system grind through its motions because Ron had warned me. Stay calm. Let the evidence speak. The moment you raise your voice, you become part of the problem, not the solution. So I did, even when every word burned. Even when Ava's grip on my hand tightened so hard it left marks on my skin. I didn't let go. I never would. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I told them about the photo, the bruises, the nightmares. But more than that, I told them about pancakes. About the way Ava folds the blanket every morning even though she doesn't have to. About the night she finally cried and didn't apologize for it. About how she started humming again, just softly, under her breath, like her body was remembering it was allowed to be alive. I told them I wasn't a trained parent. I didn't have a degree or a certification. But I showed up. And that's more than anyone else had done. The judge didn't smile. Judges don't. But when he spoke, his voice was even, firm, and, somehow, kind. Temporary guardianship was granted. It wasn't permanent. It wasn't final. But it meant she could stay. For now. We didn't celebrate that night. It didn't feel like something to toast. Instead, we went to the diner down the street. The one with the cracked vinyl booths and the menu that hasn't changed since 1994. Ava slid into the booth like it was muscle memory, ordered pancakes with extra whipped cream, and for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled before the food even came. A real smile. Not one rehearsed. Not one to appease or deflect. Just quiet joy, soft and fragile, blooming at the corners of her mouth like spring after too long a winter. I watched her laugh at something the waitress said and felt a lump in my throat so sharp I had to look away. I never planned on being someone's father. I thought that role belonged to men with steady jobs, clean houses, and a plan for the next 10 years. Men who knew how to fix more than engines. Men who could build dollhouses and show up at PTA meetings and understand the difference between ballet flats and tap shoes. I was not that man. I was a mechanic. I was broken in quiet ways. And yet, every time Ava reached for my hand, or called out my name, or waited by the window when I came home, I felt something shift inside me. Something old. Something protective. Not the kind of protectiveness that comes from duty, but the kind that rises up when you realize that someone finally chose you to be their safe place. After dinner, we drove home in silence. The kind that didn't feel heavy anymore. She fell asleep in the truck, head tilted toward the window, mouth slightly open. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a moment, engine off, listening to the sound of her breathing. I thought about that first night. How she asked me if I locked my doors, how she curled into herself like a secret she wasn't sure she was allowed to tell. And now here she was, asleep in my passenger seat. Safe, alive, mine, in a way that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. When I carried her inside, she stirred but didn't wake. I laid her gently on the couch. Her choice, still, said the bed was too far away, too quiet, too alone, and that was fine. She could take all the time she needed. I sat on the floor beside her until she settled, Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo again. The one she hid in her jacket. I'd looked at it dozens of times by now, but tonight, I finally understood something new. She hadn't kept it as a memory. She'd kept it as evidence. As her own insurance policy. Proof that her story was real. And the fact that she trusted me enough to hide it where I'd find it, that was a kind of love I don't think I'll ever earn. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to. It's been 3 months now. No ruling, yet on permanent custody. No guarantees. But every morning, Ava sits at the kitchen table and tells me what she wants in her lunch. She stopped whispering. She stopped checking the locks. Sometimes, when she's tired, she rests her head on my shoulder. She never says thank you for any of it. And I don't need her to. Because I didn't do this to be thanked. I did it because she asked me to pretend. And I couldn't pretend to stop caring once I started. She wasn't rescued. She was found. And so was I. Some people say you should never get involved in someone else's problems. But what if that someone is a child, scared, alone, and asking for your help with nothing more than a whisper? If you've ever made a decision that changed your life because someone needed you more than you needed safety, tell me below. These stories matter. She wasn't mine by blood, but she's mine now. And I'd do it all again.